Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about the Ghost Rider and Cable team-up story, Servants of the Dead. So Servants of the Dead was originally published in issues 90 through 97 of the Marvel Comics Presents book. And so Marvel Comics Presents was an anthology format series, and the way it was set up was that each issue had 4 8-page stories. And more often than not, Wolverine was the flagship character of the book, and it would be his story that was the first thing that would greet. It would be his story that would be the first thing to greet readers when they first opened the book. So, got a little tongue-tied there, sorry. But the other 3 stories would oftentimes have characters who were lesser known, to most audiences, and these anthology stories would kind of give them a chance to shine. But starting with issue 90, the Danny Ketch Ghost Rider would end up sharing the stage with Wolverine. And so, 90 was also the point where the book became a flip book. And so on one half of the book, you'd have a Ghost Rider story, and then, followed by, a story with a lesser known character. And then you flip it over, and you'd get a Wolverine story, followed by an anthology story with a lesser known character. And so, Howard Mackie, who was the regular writer for the Ghost Rider series, was also the writer for Servants of the Dead, and so there's a sense of consistency in terms of how Ghost Rider is being depicted. And I also thought he did a pretty good job of writing Cable. And one of the things that I think Howard Mackie, did well in terms of, say, with writing these 2 characters, was that both of these characters had a sense of mystery to them. Like, readers did not know a lot about them. And so, he had some, freedom to play with them as far as, I guess you could say, their motivations and personalities and what have you. And so you have these 2, grim and gritty 90s anti-heroes in a story where, it would seem easy to do the easy option of having, and the cliche one of having Ghost Rider and Cable, fight each other over a case of mistaken identity, but then teaming up against a common foe. But instead, what Howard Mackie has them do is they end up teaming up right off the bat. And so, as much as the story kind of, falls off, the rails, in its climax, I do like how Ghost Rider and Cable, made it for a good team with one another. And so Guang Yap did the interior art, and so you have this interesting surreal style on the cover with the Sam Keith art, but then you open it up and you have some very clean and polished art by Guang Yap. So the way that Ghost Rider and Cable end up getting in on this story is that they come across this girl who's on the run, and it turns out that she's actually the member or a member of this ancient underground society of warriors and monsters called the Grateful Undead. And this society, is made up of these ever-feuding factions that have their own ways of worshiping the dead, as well as their god, who has created this, society wherein, the dead are considered sacred, and yet each faction, is trying to worship the dead in their own ways through their acts of violence. And so, this girl, though, she doesn't know who she is, she doesn't remember her name, and she doesn't know exactly how she came to be, but she does know that the Grateful Undead, the ones that she lived with, were basically, wanting to sacrifice her to their god. And so she wasn't having that. And so, she's on the run for her life, and she comes across, Ghost Rider and Cable, who, are pursuing her for different reasons. Cable, because he accidentally comes across her, when he was on a nightly patrol underground when he was trying to make sure that enemy forces aren't trying to ambush the headquarters of X Factor. Then you have Ghost Rider coming across her path because he saw that she was being attacked by agents of the Grateful Undead, and as far as he could tell, she's innocent, and so that triggers Danny Ketch's transformation into Ghost Rider, since innocent blood is spilled when she's being pursued, when the girl's being pursued, I should say. And so as the two of them try and protect her, they get in on this ancient society of warriors and monsters that have lived under our world for years, and in the process they come across the god of this society and have to contend with a monster who is totally alien by their standards. And in the process they're also trying to not only protect the girl but help her try and remember who she is. But in the meantime, though, the Grateful Undead, they have this, they have their own agenda in which she is a vital part of their plans, and Ghost Rider and Cable are intruders, from the surface world that need to be destroyed. And so there were a couple things I liked about this story. I liked the fact that under Howard Mackie's pen, Ghost Rider and Cable played very well off of one another, and they actually made a good team, against the Grateful Undead. And I liked how the fact that they were both trying to protect the girl, it rang true for both of their characters at this point in time. And I also liked how, because of when this story was written, there was still a sense of mystery with both the characters of Cable and Ghost Rider. And so, I mean, for example, at this point in time, all we knew about Cable was that he was apparently a cyborg, and so we didn't know his full backstory as of yet. And Ghost Rider still has a sense of mystery to him as well, and his complicated origin story, which is oftentimes called into question, hadn't been introduced as of yet. And so both characters are written well and simply at this point. And the action scenes were actually pretty cool too, because unlike, say, the Acts of Vengeance story that had Ghost Rider and Wolverine together, which was in another story that was in Marvel Comics Presents, that was also the first story that Ghost Rider starred in for Marvel Comics Presents. But like, you compare the action scenes in that story, they seem kind of static. Like, whenever Wolverine and Ghost Rider are fighting one another, I mean, there are a couple of panels that look cool, but it looked like they're posing for a fight as opposed to actually fighting. Whereas here, when you see Ghost Rider and Cable, as well as the girl, fighting against the forces of the Grateful Undead, whether they be, say, humanoid warriors or tentacled Lovecraftian monstrosities that we only get a glimpse of, the action scenes look very well done. And Guang Yap does a really good job of showing the choreography of the fighting from panel to panel, whether it be, say, physical fighting, or say Cable using his guns on the enemy, or Ghost Rider inventively using his chain and spikes on the enemy. And so another thing that I thought was cool about the story is that usually in other books, Ghost Rider and Cable at this point in time, it's like they had all this weaponry on them that they can use to deadly effect, but they oftentimes, say, struggle with the whole "thou shalt not kill" bit. Like, they're willing to do a lot of damage, but oftentimes they aren't willing to kill as of yet. I mean, Ghost Rider, seems to, have some confusion as to whether it's okay to kill, criminals or not. And Cable, on the other hand, at this point is depicted as a straight up soldier, so killing to him is no big deal. But at the same time, though, considering that, this society of the Grateful Undead is literally made up of the undead, both Ghost Rider and Cable have a much easier time of going all out when it comes to fighting. And so there's no, complaints from other characters saying, OMG, you can't kill people, because in this case, I mean, they're literally going up against undead monsters and warriors, and so they don't have to hold back. And so that was kind of a refreshing change of pace, I thought, in terms of, say, how, they're sometimes, depending on what's going on in other stories, they're kind of held back, because they're going up against living and breathing foes. So them being able to cut loose was kind of a nice touch. And also, the girl that they're trying to help, I thought, she was kind of an interesting character, because they did a good job of, having her ever be on edge, and only getting snatches of memory, but being confused as to why she couldn't remember her whole story. And yet I do like the fact that while she was kind of a damsel in distress, she did what she could to try and fight alongside Ghost Rider and Cable. She didn't want to just be a helpless background prop, And so I kind of like that about her character. And also, even though the, story kind of falls off a cliff at the climax, wherein, you find out more information that just makes things more convoluted and confusing, I do, like the fact that, when you find out what's really going on with the girl and who and what she is, say what you will about the actual story at this point, but her, the revelation as to who and what she really is actually made her kind of a sympathetic character, I thought. And so, yeah, I actually did go away feeling sorry for her character, even though I took issue with, the story itself at that point. And also, I think that Guang Yap, when it came to, say, how he depicted this sort of subterranean world of the Grateful Undead, I mean, visually, I thought it was a pretty, neat, it made for, like, a lot of neat visual moments, like cavernous interiors, statues, of, ancient origin, a pit of bones, wherein, the god of the Grateful Undead, this sort of tentacled monstrosity that's only glimpsed, I mean, that part was actually pretty cool in terms of artwork. So, the story looked good, and it was interesting to, look at, from an art standpoint. But as the story went on, though, unfortunately, it just became very confusing because, there was a sense of mystery about the Grateful Undead because this is our first time seeing them. And also, we only get what we know from them based on what the girl's saying initially. And, there was a sense of mystery in that regard. But as, a couple of the Grateful Undead themselves, tell about who and what they are to Ghost Rider and Cable, you kind of get the feeling that, Howard Mackie may have had kind of a loose idea, for who and what the Grateful Undead were supposed to be. But as the story went on, it really feels like he's just kind of, making stuff up and you hoping that it sticks. Because, the bit about, the Grateful Undead being made up of a bunch of, feuding societies of, warriors and assassins that were all undead. I mean, that was kind of interesting. But then, you get little bits like, supposedly the Grateful Undead are the ones who brought martial arts to humanity. And so when you get to that, it's just like, okay, now you're just reaching. This just sounds stupid. And also, amongst other things, when it comes to the god of the Grateful Undead, the one that, they were wanting to sacrifice the girl to, supposedly, it's confusing because initially, we're led to believe that, their god is this tentacled monstrosity that looks like something out of Lovecraft, and we only get a glimpse of it when Ghost Rider and, Cable and the girl are fighting against it in, this, sort of river of bones in this great big pit. And I mean, there was a cool scene and everything, but then fast forward to, the last, portion of the book where the god is revealed to be this, humanoid individual who is initially clad in this, armor made up of bones, but then, and you're thinking that, this is their god, but then it turns out it's just, like an ordinary looking human individual who, I mean, he just looks like an ordinary Joe just wearing a suit of bone armor. And it really takes away from, I guess you could say, the supernatural feel of mystery that, they were sort of playing with the Grateful Undead and what we were learning about them. But then, when you go from, say, having this sort of Lovecraftian depiction of the god, and then switching it up to where it's just some random dude in a suit of bone armor, I mean, it really feels like they were grasping at straws at that point. Like they really didn't know what to do with the Grateful Undead. They didn't really know what their story was supposed to be, and they were just kind of making up as they go along. And so and it kind of made me think of how Howard Mackie had handled the Zodiac character in the Ghost Rider book. And because in both cases, in the case of Servants of the Dead, as well as the Zodiac storyline in the Ghost Rider book, you had some villains that were initially intriguing, but then, as more was revealed about them, their stories just became more and more confusing. And so that seems to be something that Howard Mackie was struggling with when it came to, say, how he developed some villains for Ghost Rider. But the other thing is that, much like the Acts of Vengeance story with Ghost Rider and Wolverine, the longer that story went on, and by the time it ended, you really felt like there really wasn't any point to the story. I mean, there were some cool moments here and there, some nice moments of artwork for both the Acts of Vengeance story and Servants of the Dead, but at the end of the day, though, when the story ends, they really just both felt pointless. And so I think that Servants of the Dead was better, just in terms of, say, how Ghost Rider and Cable played off of one another, because, I mean, that was definitely a high point for the story, and it made the story, worth reading, in my opinion. But unless you're, say, a Ghost Rider or Cable completionist, then Servants of the Dead is something that, it has some, nice visual moments from Guang Yap, but, beyond that, and how Ghost Rider and Cable are, depicted working with one another, aside from those two factors, Servants of the Dead, it's really not something that, you'll remember after you finish reading it. Like, you'll just be like, well, that happened, but why? And so, I'm going to go ahead and give Servants of the Dead 2 out of 5 stars. I mean, it looked good, and I do like how Ghost Rider and Cable were depicted in the story, and I do like how they sidestepped the cliche of first fighting then working together, and how they just went straight to working together. That was actually pretty cool. But then the longer the story went on, the more confusing it got with what was going on with the Grateful Undead. And so yeah, not exactly the best story, but it's sort of like one of those one and done type of things. Like, there are some neat things in there, but it's not necessarily a good story. But 2 out of 5 stars. So I'll go ahead and show you all the cover art real quick. So here's issue 90. You get Cable and Ghost Rider. Some good Sam Keith art. Issue 91. Issue 92. issue 93, issue 94, issue 95, issue 96, and honestly, I have no idea who this blonde girl is supposed to be. She doesn't even appear in the story. And then issue 97. I do kind of like, how Ghost Rider and Cable look on the cover, but while I like how the woman's drawn, I don't know who she's supposed to be. So, real quick, I'll just show y'all, what the woman actually looks like. The one that, Ghost Rider and Cable are trying to help. There she is right there. There we go. There's another shot of her right there. Also, you get a really cool shot of Ghost Rider and Cable. So, anyway, though, so that's what the girl actually looks like. So, I don't know exactly, who that's supposed to be. So, but yeah, so that was the cover art. But yeah, so that was Servants of the Dead. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line and let me know. And if you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Have a good day. Bye.